According to the State Treasurer, this week's federal budget couldn't have been worse for Western Australia. His federal counterpart, of course, says he's dead wrong. But the West Australian government has long complained about its falling share of GST revenue, and the new budget sees it plummeting even further, leaving Christian Porter with a $656 million hole in his own state budget next week. But is this just another political spat, or is WA really going to suffer? Claire Nichols reports.
This is not Commonwealth money. This is money belongs to the states and is shared between the states.
I can't conceive of how the deal could have been much worse, to be frank.
It's an issue that's united both sides of state politics.
Taking up the case of Western Australia is something I will continue to do.
And even got the punters talking.
Now there's a widespread feeling in Western Australia that it is not working fairly, and it's a general topic of conversation.
The perceived fairness of the GST carve-up has long been a source of frustration in WA. But economic analyst John Phillimore says the way the GST is shared is actually based on the notion of a fair go. It's all centred on a complicated formula that carries a complicated name: horizontal fiscal equalisation.
It's pretty simple. It says that all the states and territories should have roughly equal capacity to deliver services to their citizens.
The idea of sharing between the states has been around since Federation, but could never have predicted one state bringing in so much more money than anywhere else. As WA's economy has soared, its GST share has plummeted.
It's only in the last 3 or 4 years it's really started to crash, our share of the GST, and that's because the mining royalties have really kicked in, and as a result the formula basically says, well, Western Australia has a great capacity to deliver services, therefore it doesn't need as much of that money, and it distributes the rest of it to the other states.
This year, for every dollar in GST revenue WA sends to the Commonwealth, only 55 cents will come back to the state. And that's set to plummet even further in the years ahead, dropping to 29 cents by 2014-15. The state government anticipated a $600 million drop in GST revenue in this week's federal budget, but the real figure dropped even lower to $656 million. The Premier says West Australians will feel the impact in next week's state budget.
Christian Porter as Treasurer, myself and other senior ministers have had to go through and trim the budget in every area, every portfolio. We've had to delay some major capital projects. We've had to scale others down.
The state has been quick to blame Canberra for its financial woes, but is the policy really as unfair as Colin Barnett makes it out to be? John Phillimore says no.
Depending on how far you go back, somewhere between 70 and 90 years, Western Australia used to receive money from the Commonwealth. It's now, and from the other states, now it's the boots on the other foot. Now, of course, for existing residents of Western Australia, they say, well, that was the past, not now. So, you could argue that really we're probably being a little bit cute in saying how we're being robbed by Canberra.
But that's exactly what the politicians are saying.
That is a disgraceful outcome and shows a complete lack of respect for the people of Western Australia and our needs.
Taking as much as you possibly can, like a robber baron from WA.
In Perth, we have the Northbridge Link, the City Link. That's a $236 million project, the investment for which came at the request of Premier Barnett.
Gary Gray is a Labor MP and the federal member for Brand. He says it's unfair to judge Canberra's contribution to Western Australia on GST income alone.
In housing, over $1.25 billion. In hospitals, over $100 million simply in the Fiona Stanley Rehab Centre. We're looking at hundreds and hundreds of millions in roads, whether it be the Bunbury Ring Road, whether it be in Esperance, whether it be up in the Pilbara, or whether it be the airport.
He says when you include infrastructure payments, the Commonwealth return to WA is more like 88 cents in the dollar. But he's also quick to point the finger at the Premier when it comes to how the GST is shared.
It's a futile point for me to say, I don't think we get enough. I don't think we get enough. I've supported the idea of a review, but I know that there was really only one point at which all premiers and the Prime Minister stood as equals in creating the model as it should have been created, and that was on day one. And the person who was the Premier on day one was Richard Court, his lieutenant was Colin Barnett, and the Prime Minister was John Howard.
He says it was up to the 1999 state government, which signed up to the GST, to question the equalisation policy. It's a statement scoffed at by the Premier, who says the policy for sharing money had been around since the 1980s.
Well, I wasn't Premier in 1999, so I didn't sign any deal. But when the GST was introduced, the rules for allocating the money between the states was not changed.
The political tit-for-tat between the state and Commonwealth is nothing new. Almost every Premier who's walked these steps has earned a reputation for picking a fight with the Commonwealth. But commentators agree that banter has now reached a new level of bitterness.
There's always tension, but I think it's stronger than that.
I think it's turned a bit nasty in recent times.
Analysts say targeting Canberra makes good political sense in WA.
It's never really been a problem in Western Australia for a state government to complain about Canberra, whether the government here is Liberal or Labor, or whether the government in Canberra is Liberal or Labor. No West Australian politician has ever really lost a lot of friends locally by complaining about Canberra.
But the Premier says his complaints are real.
I think if you look at my record in fairness, I only take up issues. And yes, I have taken up the issue of the GST, I've taken up the issue of health. Perhaps ironically to some, I've actually supported Julia Gillard in sorting out some of the problems on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. I deal with issues. I don't take a political, rhetoric sort of position of belting up Canberra. That's not what I do.
As the relationship descends further, political analyst Greg Craven says it'd be an unwise Commonwealth that ignores the demands of an emerging state, a state that could carry the country into the years ahead.
And I think it would be a very foolish Commonwealth, New South Wales and Victoria at the moment which dismissed those types of feelings. Why? Because things have changed. We're not in a federation now where there's New South Wales and Victoria and the bush. We're in a situation where Western Australia and Queensland are very, very economically powerful. It's one thing to talk about a two-speed economy, but if you were in Canberra, would you really prefer a one-speed economy and that speed was dead slow? So I think that the sort of conversations that are coming out of Western Australia at the moment have to be taken with deathly seriousness.